Welcome, Nadia, and thank you so much for doing this. Once again, congratulations on your new young adult novel, Spilled Ink. I'm, of course, thrilled to interview again. And apart from my questions, I had a few questions from some young readers that I wanted to ask you. So I'm just going to jump right in. 18-year-old Gauri from Hong Kong is asking, since your parents migrated to the US, do you convey your parents' perspective and emotions when you write about Afghanistan? And does that come easily to you?
That's a great question. And I love that we're able to have a very international conversation because I think a lot of the themes from these stories are universal. And so even if a story is set in the United States and it's about an Afghan American family very specifically, the idea of parents being from somewhere else, of people being displaced or relocating, or young people trying to figure out how they fit into their local communities, if they look different, speak a different language, eat different types of foods, all of that, I think can be rather universal in its experience. So, when I think about my characters, I'm sometimes falling between different generations. So my generation here in the United States of Afghan Americans, most people of my age were born in Afghanistan and then immigrated to the United States at a young age. If we just think about the typical ages of people and when the waves of migration happened. And I'm a little bit different in that I was born here. I have relatives who came over, my parents came over earlier, and then I have relatives who came over later. And even, my own husband came over in the 90s. He left the country in the 90s. And so a very, very different experience of coming to the United States at a time where he's entering to go to college and resume his studies. So I usually pick and pull from different people's experiences, not just my parents, but my relatives, my extended family members. And so, a lot of times at home or in family situations, something might happen or something might come up, and they'll turn around, look at me, and be like, "You're going to put this in a story, aren't you?" Or sometimes they'll tell me, "Do not put this one in a story." But it's more of an amalgamation of those experiences. For sure, yes, I wanted to talk about what the struggle looks like. How much of other cultures do we hang on to? How much do we start to interact with new cultures, new customs, and what kind of tensions does that cause within a family?
Um, the second question, so 17-year-old Kana from Hong Kong is asking, I know the answer to this one and I love it. What inspired you to start writing? Was there a specific person or event that first sparked your interest and passion? You have to take his name.
I will have to. I've been a lifelong reader, and I have, been from the time that I was young, the kid who would sign up for the summer challenges at the library to reading under the comforters with a flashlight, all of that. And it was in our first year of being married that my husband, I mean, realized, gosh, you really like to read a lot. And in particular, we were on a vacation once, and I had packed like 4 books to read, and he was thinking we were going to have conversations during this time. And one day he just said, "You know what, you love stories, and I think you write well, and I think you should try writing a story." And it really was something that I blew off initially, but it happened. It sort of was like I wonder what that might be like. And I think that, one lesson that I've learned from that experience that I hope others will pick up on too, I hope my children will pick up on, is it's so, so important to believe in yourself. It's so important to be willing to take risks and try new things. It's also really, really important to have people around you who believe in you and see things when you might not see it. And to be able to fill in for some of those blind spots that we all have, the insecurities that we all have. And so from that came this whole detour in my life. And it has been absolutely amazing because I've been able to connect with people literally around the world. And I've been able to add stories out there to this, body of literature that we have, where I feel good that there's a little bit more representation. I'm definitely not the only one. I won't, and there'll be so many more coming, um, after me who are also writing stories. And we will never complete the picture of the Afghan experience, the Afghan American experience, of an Afghan American woman's experience. We will never complete that picture because the experiences are so wide and broad and encompassing. But I feel better that there are some moments of history, there are some little conversations, there are some little axioms that we use that I've been able to put into something that will stay out there and linger.
They will definitely stay out there and linger. And I think for most people, you do say that there are other writers out there, Nadia, but most people have read Khalid Hosseini, and after that has only been Nadia Hashimi. So I think you are, and this is like putting a lot of pressure on you right now, but you are the first Afghan woman who I think hit it big with her books, at least in mainstream publishing, because and through you, at least in the last couple of years, I've noticed more authors coming out, more Afghan authors coming out with their books. So I feel like because of you, a lot more women, Afghan women, are going to be able to say, I want to publish my story as well, because I can do that, because it does make a difference. I think women telling women's stories, there is a difference. So
There's a difference. I think we experience it as readers when you're picking up a story. Sometimes I'll experience it in a movie where I'm, watching a scene and I say to my husband, this was definitely written by a man because there's no way a woman character is going to say these lines. And this particular character,
yeah,
women say all kinds of things. There's nothing that a woman wouldn't say. But you kind of know the character and you realize there's an absolute jarring mismatch, kind of like when a film is dubbed and the lips are moving and the words are over here and it just doesn't make sense. So I'm grateful that there is an expanding number of writers who are out there so that we can have different types of voices, because there's so much to write about, right?
there is. And I know, I mean, Sahar mentioned this where they said there are some girls, in fact, who've said this on this, when they promote their posts and everything, saying, I want to write a book. And that the young Afghan poet whose poem I sent you, again, she would love to have her poetry published. And I think a lot of these dreams truly, and no bias here, but a lot of these dreams truly have been possible because they've seen you, and your books out in the world. Because again, no bias, but I do. I'm telling the truth here.
That's very generous of you. That's very generous of you. I mean, I don't know if I can't take credit for other people's writings and their own motivations, but I think we all do look at the world, and sometimes it does help to have some representation and to feel
Exactly.
like, well, maybe there is someone else doing this, and that's great. I think for me too, when I saw Khalid Hosseini's books, it was like, wow, finally there's something, maybe there's a way to do this. I love it when I see, I've now seen Afghan Americans on stages on the performance of Kite Runner that I watched. There's a young woman, Avisa, who is fantastic. And I told her, I said, I'm so happy to see you on stage because there will be other girls, other women, other boys, other individuals who are saying, that is not a closed field to me. I can be part of that experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. 12-year-old Leah from the Philippines is asking, you cover many difficult themes in your books. Do you have any advice and tips for writing difficult themes? I am a 12-year-old who likes to write queer stories.
Yes. So, that's a great question because especially right now, we think a lot about who has the right to write certain types of stories. And, you know, do I, as an Afghan American woman, have the right to write a story that comes from the perspective where the main character is a Black man living in the United States, right? And so that's sort of a question of the writing world right now is like who gets to tell these stories. For me, I think as writers we have the right to expand our body of experiences, to think and step into the shoes of somebody else. But you have to be really, really careful that you don't mess it up, because that would be such a disservice. And that's, I think, where harm is done, right? Where you misrepresent the experiences. And so even for me, when I'm writing about an Afghan family who's growing up and living in Afghanistan, that's not my lived experience. And so I find it um, that I feel the obligation, the responsibility to like seriously do my homework, to make sure I'm not misrepresenting, to make sure I'm not repeating and perpetuating stereotypes, to make sure that I'm allowing those people in the story to have agency and to be fully human, right? Not just one aspect of what it is to be an Afghan man or what it is to be an Afghan little girl, or but rather to make sure that they're fully human, which means that they have irrational moments, they have fears, they have moments of bravery, they have moments of confusion, they have moments where they make mistakes, and they have moments where they do things right. They do all of those things because they're not tropes. And so that's where, I think for every single person, it's just making sure that they're staying true to the character. Are you being the best medium for that character to come to life? Because we're not really it can get tricky, especially when you're writing stories around queer individuals, or if those are experiences that a writer has not lived through themselves. It's really treacherous to misrepresent.
That's very true. But I'm really happy a 12-year-old feels confident enough to actually, one, ask this question, and two, actually try writing these stories. So, yeah.
It's a very thoughtful question. And the fact that you're thinking about it at 12 years old means that you're going to be a very thoughtful writer, because otherwise a lot of people just bulldoze into these things and say I can do this and I can do that. And I remember one time an American woman called me. She wanted to write a story, and she was writing it from the perspective of a recently immigrated Afghan family, and she wanted to call me because she had a couple questions, things she wanted to clarify. And she was asking me things that I said, I don't know if you should write this story. If you don't know these basic elements,
Yeah.
how is the rest of it going to come together? What kind of representation might this be? And so I tried to help her out. I didn't want to completely shut her down, but I told her, have you interacted with Afghans? And she said that she had eaten at an Afghan restaurant. I said, you might want to spend more time
Yeah.
around Afghan people before you really dive into the story, because
Yeah.
and it was so easy to see the misrepresentations there. So, but the fact that this question is being posed by a 12-year-old writer is a very, very good sign that authentic stories are on the way.
The next one's from my daughter. 16-year-old Ria from Hong Kong is asking, due to its discussion of sensitive and complex themes, were there any parts of the novel that were especially hard to write for you?
That's a great question, Ria. For me, and again, this is because it is not my lived experience. There is a character in the book who is who does identify on the LGBTQ spectrum, right? And I won't give spoilers away. I won't talk too much about it, but it's a life that is a bit of a struggle, because that identity has carries a lot of stigma in the general population, and it carries a lot of stigma within the Afghan American world as well. So I wanted to, in the story, talk more about the stigma, the struggles, the family dynamics, and the impact that that can have on families and on individuals. I did not want to start to write the story of that individual itself, because that was not something I felt very, very comfortable doing, at least not at this point. Maybe in the future I can focus on that. But again, that would take a whole other set of research for me, where I really, really would want to make sure I do that type of story justice. But for me in this book, I wanted to talk more about the dynamics. And so there's also a conversation it's small, but it's in there around colorism within the Muslim community too. And, if people are Muslim, are they all seen equally in each other's eyes? Not necessarily. There's still colorism that infiltrates and creates biases and creates all these, prejudices as well. So all of those were, I wanted to include them in the story where we talk about intolerance, not just between us and the outside world, but then the us, whatever the us is, it's very different us's at all times, but within communities, there are even smaller biases, there's smaller prejudices, and it gets more microscopic the closer in that you get. But even within my household, my kids don't feel like they're treated equally. So there's always something, right? But those are what I wanted to examine, not from the perspective of people where, I could say I'm going to write that person's story, but rather a little bit more globally in terms of the struggles and the dynamics.
Thank you. This is actually the last question, and this is by 14-year-old Tara from India. What guidance and encouragement would you provide to an aspiring young female writer that you wish someone had shared with you during your formative years?
What a great question. Um, okay, so I would say read widely, read a lot. I'm sure you're reading a lot because if you're a writer, then you're a reader. Read a lot, read widely, because I've learned from writers that I've enjoyed reading. I've learned from writers that I don't enjoy reading. Sometimes I learn what I don't want to do. Sometimes I learn, this is not how you create suspense. This story is falling flat. This character is falling flat. And it's interesting for me as a reader to take that in and then kind of convert that to when I put my writing hat on. That doesn't mean that I read every story with, an analytical gaze and I'm trying to pick it apart. I love to just sit down and indulge in a story. But sometimes in the back of my mind, I'm kind of like, why is the story not working for me? Or if a story absolutely works for me at the end of it, I want to sit back and say, gosh, what did I really love about that story and what do I admire? And it's not to say that I'm going to go out and imitate or copy that writer's style. I don't think I literally could do that for any of the writers. But there are just little kind of bits and pieces of inspiration that you can gather. And the other thing I would say is to, give yourself a lot of room. Whenever you try writing, whenever you're writing something, if you write it and tomorrow you come back to it and you hate it, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're a terrible writer and that you should give up, because I don't know how many pages of my writing have been scrapped. It just is something that happens, and not even necessarily by my editor, but by me sometimes. Sometimes I'll go back to something and I say, no, what was I thinking? That's not the way this part should be told, or that doesn't need to be included, or this is just extra. And so it's okay for parts of your writing to be sort of like the working part of it. It's the process that you use to get to what you can finish and take a look at and say, this is my final piece, right? And so, for like a drawing, you have pencil lines that are going to get erased, but that's part of the process of figuring out shapes and configurations. Um, and I would say to make sure that there is space carved out for writing, because we can't be writers without time set aside for writing. And so I think it's really important, and I remind myself of that too, that if I don't sit down and write today, then I won't be a writer. And, so whether that happens in the evening or in the morning or on the weekends or whatever fits into a person's schedule, but if you're not writing, you're not a writer. You want to be a writer. And it's so easy to be a writer because all you have to do is pick up a pencil or sit down at a computer. But it's also so hard to do that because you have to get past that. It's almost like the first three words are the hardest. If you can sit yourself down and write the first three words, the rest is almost downhill. But it's the process of saying, I trust myself. I'm going to be gentle with myself. I'm also going to be a little hard on myself. I'm going to push myself. But sitting down and starting, I think, is really the hardest part. So sometimes I have to, sorry, my puppy is whiny, but You have to sit down and say, these are the hours that I'm going to put into it. This is when I'm going to do it because I'm committed to it.
No, that's very true. And I think, yeah, it's even just getting yourself to sit at a desk and also to kind of realize that you could be a writer or to call yourself that. I think that also is something that doesn't come easily to people because it's a very heavy word. you know.
It's a heavy word, and I'll tell you, I remember sitting on an airplane, and you have to fill out those customs forms, and it
Yeah.
asks you name and address, and then occupation, and for a long time, I would wonder, what do I write in here? Do I write this? Do I not write this? And so,
You have
so
two
I
heavy
was
words you could
preoccupied
use.
with the occupation, right? But yeah, I think, the minute you start showing up and you consistently start writing, you're a writer. You're a
Yeah.
writer at different types of different phases in your in your career or of your journey with writing, whatever it may be. Not everyone has to write for being published. I mean, there are lots of people who write because it's important to them. And journaling, I think, is also a great way to practice. If I could have I wish I could see my journals from when I was young, but I didn't journal. I journaled, like maybe once a year where I would say, "Oh, I'm going to pick up a new notebook and this is it. I'm going to have a journal." And now I'm really committed, and then I wouldn't do it. But I wish I had, because I think there's so much growth and reflection
Yeah.
that we can see, and we misremember and reconstruct so much of our past and so much of our feelings that I think it would be really helpful and bring a lot of insight to a young writer. If you did journal, you'll value it later.
That's very true. That's one thing you and I have in common. I can't journal. I have a closet full of journals because I love buying the pretty ones. I have all kinds of pens, but I can't journal. It just does not come. If I
Yeah.
sit and write, it's just poetry. So for me, I think maybe poetry is my way of journaling because, yeah, it's the only thing I know how to write.
It's true. And I have like you, I have beautiful notebooks, beautiful pens every time I go out. And now I'm like, oh, stop myself, because what am I going to do with this? But I use it now just to write down if the kids say something funny or there's just a memorable moment. I'll just kind of jot it down, because we forget things, we lose
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So journals are good, but I love the idea of journaling. It's like yoga for me. I love the idea of yoga, and I know it should be done, and I recommend it to everybody. And yet I don't do it.
That's what I do. so, but yeah, no, but thank you so much, Nadia. And this was fun. I think we need to do this with every interview. And I just want to put the cover out there again for everyone to see. Yeah, go buy this, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shika. It's always nice to talk to you. And thanks to everyone who submitted those questions. I love it. I love that they're reading. I love that you're writing, and I love that you're thinking about the whole process.